Hello, and welcome once again to Neurologic. I'm your host, Leo Jones. This episode is the first I've ever done during Autism Acceptance Month. It's an important milestone for this podcast, and in celebration, Neurologic will be broadcasting more episodes than normal, talking about autistic women, intersectionality, non-speaking autistics, and much more. Today brings a combination of topics: awareness versus acceptance, parents, discrimination, autism rates, absurd news stories, and others. With me today is Shayna. You remember her from our first parents episode. So welcome back, Shayna.
Thank you.
Recently we've talked a little bit about awareness versus acceptance. Some people will see April as Autism Awareness Month. They might hear about that. They might see the Light It Up Blue campaigns. They're not as familiar or as receptive to acceptance. So let's kind of go in. What is the difference between awareness and acceptance when it comes to autism?
I think first you need to establish that there are two distinct groups that are kind of at odds here. We'll talk about it a little bit later in the episode as well, but just briefly, they're the autism community and the autistic community, and these are not subsets or like one community with two different names. They are two distinct communities, and like all other communities, they have differences in beliefs, terminology used, preferences, and cultures and identities. So when you're looking at the issue of acceptance versus awareness, this is an issue that you can't even say the community is divided on because we're talking two different communities. But this is an issue where you see a lot of difference between the two communities. Whereas my community, the one that I call home, the autistic community, often looks at awareness as being something that is humiliating and degrading and isn't done with any regard to our own well-being or privacy or respect as a human being. The autism community seems to have a much different view of awareness campaigns where it's more about you're not alone, other people are going through this. They're actually perceived, it appears, as positive. So it depends really what eyes you're looking at, and the thing I can say is that acceptance is going to be good for both communities. If you're going to, if you think of the things you're aware of tornadoes, and you're aware of hurricanes, and you're aware of locusts and famine and all these things, but you probably don't accept them or think highly of them. But it's things that your acceptance of, ladybugs or butterflies or rainbows or whatever your acceptance of, that's usually a positive message. It's usually conveyed in a way that is respecting of human rights and dignity. And so I feel like even if the autism community is getting this reaffirming message through the awareness campaigns, that because acceptance validifies all, I mean, if you're talking about, my child also does this, you're still reaching into that group that says you're not alone through acceptance.
So acceptance would kind of reach both goals in both areas. Specifically when it comes to awareness versus acceptance, who are the people that make up these separate groups? You talked about autistic and autism communities. So with the autistic community, I would assume that's full of people who are actually autistic and diagnosed. And the autism community, who makes up the actual autism community?
Okay, so a little bit of an alteration to what you said. The autistic community is made up of people who identify on the spectrum. That is slightly different from what you said with diagnosis. The autistic community is actually very accepting and warm to people who self-diagnose and otherwise have unofficial diagnosis. Say a doctor says, hey, I think you're autistic, but you have the option, do you want the diagnosis or not? That person can still come to the autistic community and say, my doctor says I'm probably on the spectrum, and we receive them with open arms, and it's just a wonderful community, very accepting, and we do that for a number of reasons. You don't go to a doctor every time you have a headache and have them take scans and say, hey, you have a headache, especially when you're older. The differences between autistic and allistic brains are just so plain. They're so obvious to those, especially if you're on the spectrum side. You're very aware. A lot of times you hear the non-autistic say that, oh, we're all a little bit autistic, or that, oh, I get that too. But when you're actually looking through an autistic brain, those differences are not something that you see everybody struggle with. You see them as completely separate from, so I call it kind of neurotypical privilege to say that we're all a little bit autistic or something, because true autistics know that that's not true. And they can see that difference. But that's a little bit of a rabbit hole. The other thing is that diagnosis is an expensive procedure, especially in the U.S. And it's just, you can go for a diagnosis, be autistic, and be told you're not autistic. So because of that.
Does that happen quite a bit?
Well, it happened to me. It does. A lot of times, especially because a lot of psychologists seem to specialize in things. So if you go to a person who diagnoses personality disorders for autism, they might say that you have a bunch of personality disorders non-configured rather than say, this autism is the thing, because that's where they specialize at. Or if you go to somebody who specializes more with ADHD, they're likely to say that you have ADHD as opposed to autism, even though autism more correctly fits who you are. So those are some failings within the medical system, all leading to us being very accepting.
And so the medical persons, they would fall into the autism community?
They are in the autism community.
Okay.
The autism community is much, much bigger. It encompasses the therapists, the teachers, the parents, the siblings, the cousins and brothers and sisters and friends. And if you have some type of rubbing elbow to the autistic world, then you fall within the autism community. And although generally talked about by the autistic community as kind of negative, because of awareness campaigns and what that does to us, because of not deferring to us or letting us choose our own terminology and stuff. Our allies are also part of the autism community, and I've had great conversations where, a lot of autistics got together and said, this ally is amazing and we're going to give her honorary autistic status. And she looked at us and said, I don't want it. That's your community. I'm happy where I am.
That seems like the response that you would actually want from someone like that. When talking about these two groups, there seems to be a lot of gray area in some circumstances. I wanted to kind of dive further with this a little bit. One of the major areas of contention, especially that I've seen through my experience, is that you see a lot of parent advocacy groups sort of at odds with autistic advocacy groups. They both talk about the same mission, but they go about it in very different ways and have very different actions they take. So where you see some parent groups with awareness campaigns and you see autistic advocacy groups with acceptance campaigns. That's kind of a little bit of the difference there, but when it comes to awareness and acceptance, what are kind of some of the dividing lines between these two groups?
So awareness campaigns, we've all seen them. I was not in the autistic community at the time. I was just undiagnosed. But a large reason why I never went to autism when I was looking for my identity, I went to ADHD and all these things, is because awareness campaigns of the 1990s told me that they were the kid rocking in the corner, mumbling to themselves. And that was an awareness campaign. You had the commercials on. I wasn't unaware of what autism was. I thought I knew what it was. But what the campaigns had told me was dramatically different than what my life showed. And it was dramatically different than what I found out when I actually researched what is autism in 2011. So these awareness campaigns have been around a lot, but they usually show, like I said, the kid in the corner. They're as prevalent as when you're on the Mighty and they have an autistic article and it's the kid that's behind a faded glass or something. That is a part of awareness campaign. It's the idea that they're separate, they want to be there. It's very much looking at autism through an outsider's point of view and raising awareness of what autism is, which one has to ask, can they really do that? It's the perception of what others see autism as. It's not usually what those of us who are autistic describe autism as being like.
Okay, so when it comes to awareness itself, I mean, we've kind of explained how we view acceptance. I mean, your view very closely mirrors mine with very insignificant differences. When it comes to awareness, I gathered from what you talked about before you started recording that you've actually asked those who are in the autism community and those who are in the autistic community what they think of these awareness campaigns. Could you describe that a little bit?
So recently, one of my autistic peers has released a Facebook status asking non-autistics, and she actually said if autistics reply, she will delete our comments. I honored her and did not reply, but I really kind of appreciated that. She said, non-autistics, how do you view awareness campaigns? What's their effect on you? And I followed it, and I plugged it on my Facebook, and I had 2 people reply, so it wasn't really all that common to reply to. But the overwhelming response, she got a lot more replies than I did. The overwhelming response was that awareness was a happy thing. It was something where, like I said earlier, parents connect to the advertisement as like a lifeline. This isn't just me experiencing this is something that other people go through. So I took that information that we were getting this feedback that awareness is good, which is completely mind-boggling different from what we view awareness as. And I went to one of my parent groups that I was just added into. And they were talking about what were your reactions to finding out your kid was autistic. And overwhelmingly, response after responses, I was scared, I was frightened, I was devastated. These are not words of celebration. And so I thought, well, we're going through this. We view awareness campaigns as bad. Maybe they view it as good, being, I know I have a diagnosed child, but what are these campaigns doing? Like I said, I was made aware of autism through awareness campaigns, and my thought was I could not be autistic, so those shaped my viewing of autism. So I asked them how awareness campaigns affected their, of course, self-reporting, but affected their perception of that moment when they found out their kid was autistic. This information that you were aware of before, how does it affect your reaction? And again, I got a lot of positive replies about I'm not alone, and it had nothing to do with the fact that I was upset about it, or and that was really interesting to me. I still don't know what conclusions to draw from it. But again, I would reach out and say that you can use acceptance to show that you're not the only ones out there.
So whenever you looked into this, you saw that in the autism community, awareness was overall seen as a very, very significant good, whereas those who are actually on the spectrum saw this as something that was harmful and detrimental to what they really wanted. So in that regard, does awareness undermine efforts for acceptance, or does it just, does it kind of just sit there and sort of be ineffective? I know it's kind of a biased question, but
the way I see it, I think it does undermine acceptance, because like I said, you're aware of 20 hours, you're aware of AIDS, you're aware of all kinds of things. I don't understand how, as an autistic parent, one thing that I want to do is raise my son to know that we have a history as an autistic people. And I want him to know that history, and it terrifies me because I also want him to be proud of who he is. I want him to, someday when the world is in a better case, take up our cause from a much better perspective where people are looking to him. And I don't understand, like as an adult, I can take in our history and I can rationalize that, but how do you take a child who, I know they're not as innocent as we like to say, but at the same time is so innocent and is so in this world where he's accepted and loved, and say, hey, by the way, this whole world isn't really friendly to you. And this is the things that are being said on your behalf. You see awareness campaigns where the meltdown's being played with really scary music. They're using scare tactics, and there's a reason for that, because awareness to be able to be remembered has to jog the emotions, and the emotions it usually jogs are fear and pity for the parents. And how do you keep that child proud of who he is, despite the fact that this is what's being said about them? It's something I'm trying to learn from Black parents and from other minorities who have dealt with that. They have to tell their kid, we were slaves, but we're awesome people. And people treat us like crap, but we're still awesome. And so I feel like as an autistic person, I can learn a lot from them in how to raise my child better.
We will talk a lot about that in an upcoming episode about intersectionality. That's something that I think is... We have a lot to learn from other rights movements. That's a big thing. It's kind of trigger territory because they don't want to step on someone's toes or co-opt what they've done, but learn from that. Oftentimes you'll hear minority parents have to sit their children down for the talk, and it's not about going through puberty or sexual reproduction. It's about when you go out and hang out with your friends at night at certain places and you encounter the police, here's how to handle this. Or you have to handle yourself a certain way around these people or that people because you could be killed. So I think there's a lot to learn in that. And I'm looking forward to doing the episode, so that will be coming up. But I wanted to kind of move from there and talk a little bit more about parents and some of the responses you've seen. Mm-hmm. One of the questions I had, this is something that I've heard for a lot of my time being diagnosed from a lot of autism parents, not autistic parents, but autism parents. And it's, every time I hear it, it still hurts. It still feels really horrible and disgusting. Usually if their child does something, they'll post about on Facebook something really great, like they aced a test, or they went to their first slumber party, or they went to a theme park and didn't have a meltdown because of the overwhelming sensory impact that it has. They will say something along the lines of, or post something along the lines of, take that autism, or not today autism. These and similar phrases seem to me to be very hurtful because instead of really focusing on that the child is growing up and they're learning to adapt to their surroundings through various coping mechanisms that hopefully are healthy, it seems like autism itself is being demonized as some sort of parasite. What do you think?
Definitely. The parents tend to think that they're, you hear a lot of person first language, person with autism. Ironically, I've found out lately a lot of parents have an issue with person who has autism. Wait, maybe I got those mixed up. I don't know. They're the same in my head. One of them, I was talking with a parents group and somebody's like, oh no, that's horrible. You never say with autism. But yeah, they have autism. Or it's one, like I said, I get it mixed up in my head, which I thought was interesting. But there's a lot of concept of like, there's a child, their child was taken away from them at some point. Autistics are infantilized a lot. You hear a lot about mental age. And I actually have heard my autistic friends say, oh, well, I'm a lot younger than I am. And I tell them, no, you're the age that you are. Your brain is has a more youthful interest and more, but that doesn't stop you from being 25. Even if you like Peppa Pig or whatever, you're what's PJ Masks. If you're a 25-year-old autistic person who loves watching PJ Masks, you are still a 25-year-old. That doesn't make you any younger. And she's like, oh wow, I never thought of that, because all of these parents and everybody's been telling her, oh, if you're 25, you must like The Big Bang Theory or whatever it is.
You must give up what you've enjoyed.
Right.
For your childhood, yeah.
And so I don't like mental age for that reason. And another reason is because IQ tests are incredibly inaccurate for all people, but specifically for nonverbals, and that's where you get a lot of the severity from, is because your IQ is supposedly lower, but these tests are not effective for diagnosing IQ. That's specifically from nonverbal.
That brings up a story I read that was somebody had written. That's it's very specific. I actually read an article that discussed how IQ tests do not indicate success in life. And it was specifically aimed at autistic individuals, where depending on the IQ test, they would score very low. And the problem was, he's described it, they're not very accurate, because the tests themselves may be an actual obstacle to determining what that person's intelligence is. Because if you're doing it by paper, they may not have a lot of ease dealing with paper and pencil, depending on the surfaces. If it's on a computer, they may not be able to handle certain things, such as staring into a bright light, because that's what a computer screen essentially is a light, et cetera, et cetera. So many different things. Not to mention that if the person is unable to communicate effectively by traditional or socially accepted means, that lessens how we view their intelligence. Oftentimes it seems like we are constantly graded upon how we are functioning in society and socially, rather than actually how intelligent we truly are. So that's actually a very good point.
And then it goes the other way as well. Just because you're intelligent doesn't mean that you're functioning at all in society. And I really don't like functioning terms for that reason. But to get back to the question, it's because of infantilization that you get a lot of that. Take that autism because my child is so young, then this was totally unaccepted. Oh, not unaccepted. Unexpected. There we go. It was unexpected, and so I didn't expect it, and so take that autism as if you're fighting something, but that child, every bit of them, is autistic, and they grow and mature, and rather than take that autism, it should be, hey, look at this development. My autistic child was able to go, and don't make it into inspirational porn. That goes so close together. But, we took my autistic child to the zoo or amusement park, and it was a great experience. That's great. That's development.
Do you think that broadcasting such things is a good thing? I mean, I know that a lot of parents do this on Facebook and other social media for all children, regardless of what disability or anything else. They will post about their achievements. But do you think posting the most basic and mundane, what the parents see as achievements, is that, do you see it as being detrimental?
Again, I think it's infantilization. I think it's the idea that it really depends on how it's handled. 90% of the time, they're probably not handling it correctly. I'd like to think that the things that I post about my son on Facebook are done in a way that honors him as a person, as well as, hey, he's autistic, and we can have fun with that because it's true.
Well, in my personal opinion, yours don't come across as saccharine or shallow. It actually seems, heartfelt and genuine.
Right,
so.
And I feel like that, a typical parent may be posting that a year earlier, but I don't we've waited 3 years to hear him say whatever. I mean,
Hear him say I love you.
It's a lot of times if we mention the words where I love you, it's because of a greater context of him saying something really silly before that. I think I shared a story about him, probably on this podcast even, so I won't rehash the whole thing, where he just turned to his dad and gave him a hug rather than said he was autistic. And so there are just these moments you want to share, but I'd share that if, my neurotypical kid did that. If my neurotypical kid looked at mom and said, Mom's autistic, and Dad, are you autistic? And Dad said no, and he gave him a hug, I'd tell it just the same, except for now my neurotypical kid, or my autistic kid, is neurotypical. And then in those cases, if you're not trying to inspire and you're not infantilizing, and you would honestly tell this story regardless of your child's neurotype, then, go ahead and share it. You don't necessarily, if you're sharing it, you probably don't even have to say that your kid's really autistic, because probably your friends know it. And so if you go out of your way to say he's autistic all the time, he's autistic, then you're probably doing it for a different reason, and I would question why. But yeah, it's a parent thing to want to brag or to whatever, and in that case, like I said, just treat your child, in that case, treat your child like a child. I hesitate to say that because I do believe that autistic and allistic individuals have completely different needs. And so if you treat your autistic child like a typical child, usually that's not a good thing. But in this case, when you're sharing information, if you want to do it in a way that is uplifting and accepting of your child, and respectful of their humanity, then yeah, talk about them like you would any other child.
That's very, very, I think that's very, very important. I mean, I am not a parent, but I think that's something that is discounted quite a bit, but needs to be always viewed and always considered. Speaking of consideration, I wanted to talk a little bit about a recent article. I think it was earlier this year, actually. I found it in Reuters as well as others. I'll even post all the links to the articles on the podcast description. This one actually describes that there is a little change in proportion of United States kids with autism. That the rate of autism has not declined, but it has plateaued. As of 2016, approximately 2.8% of children from 3 to 17 years had autism spectrum disorders, slightly up from 2.2% in 2014, but the differences in any kind of increase or decrease are so statistically insignificant that we're seeing the oft quoted 1 in 68 number remaining steady. So recently I talked about this at the beginning of the year, that this is part of what I believe in my own theory. Now, it's not been scientifically proven, but I'm going with more focusing on human beings and our diagnosis tools, that because we've had better diagnosis tools and we've worked at finding out who is actually autistic and who is not, and really getting into it rather than just going with the same old diagnosis observations and lessons. Now that we're better diagnosing it, we're seeing that we have more people who are truly diagnosed, and now that we've gotten to a point where we've saturated most of the country with these modern day tools, that rate is becoming more realistic. What do you think?
I think that's true. I think that a lot of attention is given to these statistics. Just recently, there was a thing released that said it went up, which it didn't. People didn't look at it, said that developmental disabilities gone up, but not autism itself is still statistically insignificant.
That is not an easy word.
It's not. There's too many S's. And anytime somebody hears echo of going up, everybody kind of freaks out. And I would caution parents not to do that, because I do believe at some point there will be another increase, either because you're looking at generations from when we were institutionalized and not able to get married, and now we're marrying and having children that are more than likely autistic. I know so many stories of all autistic families that are just so sweet, and obviously if you have more than 2 kids, then you've increased the population even fractionally, and if there's a lot of you doing that, that's going to happen. You also have underreporting of women and girls not being diagnosed to this day. So if that number goes up, I wouldn't be concerned. I do think it's people that analyze statistics and like predict future statistics have said that when all is said and done, when we get to it evening out for good, it's going to be somewhere between 2 to 4% of the population. And I do believe
that is a large. That's quite a bit. That's actually. It seems like it's close to the actual rate of total disability in the United States.
No, 10% is about the term.
10%?
10% is about all disabilities. And that's, of course, of the world. Right now, we're between 1 and 2%. So there's a bit of room for things to go up without it being an epidemic or anything. So I would really caution people to just kind of look at that. When and if it does go up, to critically analyze it and be like, okay, so girls are finally getting diagnosed, or if it's 20 years from now, I would definitely see there being a generational change, being that we got older and able to have kids.
Do you think this will take the steam out of the whole epidemic panic? I mean, you did bring it up briefly, and we have heard the word epidemic used so much over the past 10 years that, well, the rates keep rising, so there must be an epidemic of something. It's got to be this or it's got to be that. But now that the rates are leveling off, and we may see a slight increase in the rate, but it will be so, as you said, it won't be very significant. We'll just keep slowly going down. Do you think we'll stop hearing about the autism epidemic?
It depends, really. I hope so, because it's epidemiologists have studied it and said there is an epidemic. There is a population increase in the world. There is better diagnostic standards. There is better knowledge within the diagnostic community, people that diagnose. But there is not an epidemic. And so my hope, and I say this with a bit of reservation, my hope is that people would start paying attention, because you do hear, I would say at least weekly, in parent groups you'll hear about the epidemic and how rates are still rising. And let me be clear, rates are not rising and have not risen in 8 years. I was diagnosed in 2011, rates were still 1 in 68 at that point. It's still 1 in 68 today. It has plateaued. And I expect that plateau will stick around for, like I said, several more years. And I would hope that if in 10 or 15 years you do see an increase to 1 in 40 or whatever it may be, people would look at that analytically rather than, oh my God, it's on the rise again, it's going to happen all over again, and look at it and be like, hey, what has happened in 15 or 20 years? Well, kids have grown up, they've grown and they've had their own kids in higher quantities than before, so we saw that number go up. And I think that it should relieve, if you look at the analysis, there should be a plateau and then maybe a small increase, and hopefully people take that logically and are able to see what's happening versus it's happening all over again. We're going on another epidemic rise, because it's not. I like to say autistics are born, not made.
I want to go back to Peppa Pig. There's been a couple of news stories that are just absurd, even goofy, and some that actually are getting a little more serious when it comes to discrimination and the way autistics are seen and described. So there's a few articles I'm going to go through here. One of them actually says that Peppa Pig purportedly was said to have caused autism. Somebody made up a Harvard study that Peppa Pig, watching it on British children's television, was making children autistic. There is no Harvard study on this. There's one peer-reviewed study that says that a children's television show may help autistic kids, but ultimately, no, there is no actual study. In fact, the post on a parody news site states that a group of Harvard experts did a study that revealed Peppa Pig is one of the main causes of autism among children. The fact that we're having to release a news story that says this is just off the wall goofy. And I first laughed when I saw this because I thought, well, of course not. I don't know how long Peppa Pig has been in existence. I don't even know what Peppa Pig is.
I didn't watch it, did you?
No, I was Mr. Rogers, Sesame Street myself. Those were my things growing up. But what the hell is Peppa Pig? I have no idea. Have you seen this before?
I have seen it. My kid knows who Peppa Pig is because he plays on YouTube. But I'm pretty sure that prior to being autistic, he did not have a clue who Peppa Pig was. So it is on YouTube, and I don't know what channel it actually airs on, if it airs on TV at all. I guess it must be a British thing.
That's what it says here. I just don't know. I have no idea what does Peppa is. Is it like Bob the Builder, or is it like Teletubbies, or is it like the Wiggles, or which? I mean, can you give me a comparison? Because I have no idea, and honestly, I'm too lazy to look up what Peppa Pig does on their show. I know
that a lot of parents are annoyed at Peppa Pig. I think there's something about a voice that just is really grating to most ears. It seems to be very almost obsessive forming in children. I know my kid gets all excited, Peppa, Peppa, Peppa. And like I said, I've never seen a single thing. I know he sees it on. He likes egg revealing videos where you'll crack open the egg, and he'll go crazy whenever Peppa's revealed. But I don't know that he's actually seen episodes, so I have no idea. But I would go with it being something that's kind of obsession forming and generally just something kids hook onto that parents don't like. Kind of like Caliloo or whatever. Caillou. Oh, here we go. So there's, you guys can't see this, but here's Peppa Pig.
Oh, okay. It's very two-dimensional.
It does look very two-dimensional. The animals all look very similar, honestly.
I see. Okay. So it's a bunch of animals. So, okay, yeah, so I'm seeing this, and...
I mean, the pig looks like an elephant, and just the nose is upwards.
Yeah, I'm like, this doesn't seem like a problem. I mean, but then again, I'm not really a children's TV fan. I'm not going to lie. I will watch Mr. Rogers on Netflix if I think it's there right now. I'm not sure, but I heard that it was coming to Netflix, but I'm not sure. But if it does, yeah, I'll watch some old episodes because I liked it, thought it was great. I thought Fred Rogers was an awesome individual who was very, very intelligent. But anyway, back to the story. So the thing is, this isn't just... Somebody didn't just totally make this up out of thin air. Apparently this goes back to an old study by 3 economists, none from Harvard, that uses the Bureau of Labor Statistics American Time Use Survey from the 1970s and 80s to find some sort of vague link between autism, cable television watching, and rates of rain and snow. I noticed they didn't use rain and snow to say that it was causing autism, which would be very... I mean, Missouri would be full of autistics every time because we get so much. But apparently somebody saw this and then decided to make a causal loop to Peppa Pig, which... This is... I don't have the words for this. I mean, I at first laughed. I'm like, no, this can't be a thing. So maybe somebody got in their heads. Maybe somebody said something, or, you know, maybe they said that when they watched Peppa Pig, their children displayed autistic tendencies, but in a much more discriminatory or bigoted way. But this is no. Apparently, that's where it comes from.
And there's actually a slew of this study or this, and it's usually a small study or some sort, or it could be a joke site, causes autism. And I think one thing that we need to just get away from is cause of autism. We are looking into genetics, but you're not really going to say even a genetic causes autism. You're going to say that is the genetic code if it is found out. You're not going to say it causes autism or whatever. But we know that it's very, very complex. To say that it causes it, like I said, autistics are born, not made. So you can't really have a cause. And a lot of a popular saying back is that sex causes autism because it causes children who are autistic sometimes.
I mean, there's a correlation. In your opinion, is Peppa Pig autistic?
I don't know. I have heard that they're... I don't know enough of this. I don't know a lot of it. I don't know a lot about Peppa Pig. But I have heard that there's a character that's supposed to be, like, obsessive or something that they correlate with autistic traits.
I mean, I know on Sesame Street they have an autistic character, and they did it on purpose. But I'm just sitting back going, maybe they thought Peppa Pig was autistic. I mean, can a cartoon character really, truly be autistic, or only have the labels put on them because they are crafted by a group of people? I'm not sure.
I will just say this. If mice can be autistic, why can't cartoon characters?
That's a good point. And I remember the mice story along with the dog story about can dogs have autism as well, which I don't... It just gets to be very, very, very just goofy. Just goofy. I'm like, why are we even looking at this? This doesn't... I don't care. The reason why I brought this one up is because just how absurd it was, but it's a bunch of news stories. I'm like, this doesn't matter to me that much. I'm not going to find commonality with Peppa Pig. I'm not going to find commonality with, you know, a dog. Although I do like dogs, but I'm not going to find like, hey, the dog's autistic like me. No, the dog's not autistic like me. But getting a little more serious, this other story from, I think in January, or maybe it was around the holidays, a Duke University professor named Nancy McLean shared an observation during a lecture, actually earlier this year in February, at New York City's Unitarian Church of All Souls, where she was discussing her book that she had recently written called Democracy in Chains. During a QA, somebody asked her about economist James Buchanan, who is known for his role in shaping libertarian political theory. And why I bring this up is because what she said next. McLean talked about the question a little bit, said it was a very profound question, and then said the following, quote, "I didn't put this in the book, but I'll say it here. It's striking to me how many of the architects of this cause, meaning libertarianism, seem to be on the autism spectrum. You know, people who don't feel solidarity or empathy with others and who have kind of difficult human relationships," end quote. So when I remember hearing this, and at first I didn't want to be completely just, grabbing the pitchforks and the torches, but at the same time, it's very dismissive of autism, and it's also putting libertarianism, instead of it being a legitimate political opinion, like so many others out there, seems to tie it into, well, if you have a disability, then you're going to be this. I mean, am I blowing this out of proportion?
No, I think it does go back to the discrimination against autistics. What would it matter if every autistic was libertarian? Because of the way that our brain thinks and processes, we may come to similar conclusions that may align or may not align with libertarianism. Honestly, I kind of am an individualist, so I don't know a ton. I know, like, Republican and guns or something, and Democrats and social programs, and libertarian. Yeah, you're getting into iffy territory there, as if I know what they even stand for. But when it comes to the fact that this is a brain type, let's just lay it out there. What autism is it is a human brain, presumably, that runs a different operating system. It is completely. I have recently released, and it's been well received by the autistic community, a picture that shows and you can link this in the references if you want, but it shows a spider web, a very beautiful spider web, had some imperfections, and it says that is a autistic brain. Of course, if you have a different neurodiversity, you're not going to have that brain, but if you're going with autistic or autistic, it shows the autistic brain as this really well-connected map. There's a lot of connections. It doesn't take you a lot of time to get from point A to point B because it all makes visual sense. And then you show another spider web by a different type of spider, and it looks like a bunch of mini spider webs connected with just a few lines between them, making it one web. But you can see these clusters here, there, and everywhere. And I said, this is like the autistic brain. And this is how the connections are and how they're very, very dense in certain areas. So this is what it means to be autistic, is to have this brain structure that is very clustered and kind of weak, maybe, between the different clusters when it comes to transmitting information back and forth. It's not as efficient as you might see in a non-autistic brain. And so it would be presumable that somebody who thinks in clusters and has those pathways working may align, majority-wise, under a political spectrum. But what does that matter? What does it change? What they're doing with this article is they're trying to, as you said, devalue or delegitimize the political theory because of who they perceive. They don't even have a study saying, oh, we asked so many libertarians, are you autistic or not? This is just somebody saying that, oh, well, it appears to me that the people that follow this philosophy tend to be on the autistic. They're delegitimizing it, and that is discrimination against autistics.
Yeah, because I can see that, because but the thing is, they're not going with, they're going with the parts that they've heard about autism when it comes to awareness campaigns. I mean, looping right back around
Right.
to the beginning, describing they don't feel solidarity or empathy with others.
Which isn't true, by the way.
No, it is actually not. The problem with the empathy thing, it's like, that's not true at all, but it's been used so much, and it's been repeated so much that eventually people associate that. The solidarity thing, that's patently false based upon decades of autistic culture and organization. But the last one, who have kind of difficult human relationships, like, well, that's, if we're going to apply that on a non-biased platform, then yeah, I would say so. I've had difficult human relationships. I don't want to say, well, who hasn't, because maybe some people haven't. And I don't want to normalize certain things or delegitimize certain difficulties that some autistic people have. But, I mean, that is kind of true that, autistic people tend to have some difficult relationships because of the people that they may talk to or may encounter. They may not understand certain things, but it's not because of a lack of empathy or solidarity. It's due to other things. I didn't really like the way that she took this and decided to take these very handpicked and mythologized parts of autism and slap them upon libertarians, which libertarianism in a very very Cliff Notes version, which I'm probably going to get wrong, and somebody will tell me I'm wrong, but libertarians are not exactly on the right, they're not really on the left, but they are for a small government, a very minimal set of laws, very big on property rights. They're against eminent domain. They are very pro-freedom to do whatever you want, so no restrictions on, no need to get a driver's license or this license or that license. It's, you can do what you want, but you also face the consequences of those actions, so there's no safety net, so to speak, in that regard.
And I mean, I'm not using autistics to delegitimize this. I could see that appealing to a great number of autistics. But the way that it's being used in this article is definitely in the attempt to delegitimize. And I don't appreciate that.
Yeah, it just, when I read that, it brought back another article that I actually read last year about something George Will said about the president. Because with this, I don't like that being used, because if she had done it with characteristics of Down syndrome, I'm pretty sure the response would have been overwhelmingly just a huge wave of people saying this is really horrible for you to say. But because she said about autism, then she kind of doesn't get away with it, so to speak, but not really a whole lot of pushback on it. Anyway, so last year in October,
Can we actually, because you mentioned Down syndrome, can
we
just talk about, I mean, this whole entire episode is about awareness versus acceptance.
Sure.
And what's really interesting, I don't know how many people know, but March was actually Down Syndrome Awareness Month.
Oh,
and
I was not aware.
It is. And March 21st, actually, you were supposed to wear really cool socks, and I totally meant to, and I looked up, and it went from the 20th to the 22nd. I don't know when the 21st happened. Because I was going to post Facebook and be like, in honor of all my Down syndrome people, I got cool socks. But anyways, it's incredibly different. And there have been posts on the autistic community about the differences between, and they do use the word awareness, Down Syndrome Awareness Month and the following Autistic Awareness Month. And I don't know if it's because these parents, most of them have chosen to have Down syndrome children. They know because of prenatal screening that this is what they're getting into. Their month of awareness is positive. It's about empowering. Look what I've done. I have Down syndrome and I'm just like you. Or it's a very wonderful thing to watch from an outsider's point of view. And when you get to April, when it becomes Autism Awareness Month, we call it Autism or Autistic Acceptance Month.
The storm clouds come back.
The storm clouds are back, and you're very much awareness. Be-awareness, I think, is the.
Ooh, that's very well put.
The term that is often used to point out the difference, because it's not treated as this awesome thing that you have in it, or you are, and you're great. It's treated as, we want you to be aware that these people are here, and let's try to cure them. Let's try to find what causes them so we can. And I wonder if that's not the difference. The difference is a majority of people who have Down syndrome kids have chosen this life, whereas autistic parents feel like they didn't get the choice.
Do you think, and that's actually a very good point. Do you think that...
And I did say autism parents, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
You're fine. do you think that prenatal testing... I mean, in my opinion, I don't think that would change a whole lot in regards to autism, because I kind of see that the various stimming and some of the reactions, the being overwhelmed as a child, as an autistic child, the reactions that you get from other people, the reactions you have are much more are surprising, not always able to be perceived or prepared for. Whereas with Down syndrome, there seems to be less of unexpectedness. You seem to know more of what your child will go through in life, what supports they need, what accommodations they'll need. Whereas with someone who is autistic, that has a lot more variables in play.
It's really a hard discussion. As an autistic parent, I want more than anything for there to be a screening. I'm pregnant, yay, I go in, they say your child's going to be autistic. I know from day one how I'm going to raise that child, because I don't have to worry about, are they autistic and I'm not getting them their needs, because I know where I'm going from. It comes with a high price tag. And that price tag is what Down syndrome has faced, where, like I said, the parents overwhelmingly know that they're having Down syndrome kids, and there's a whole flock of people that you don't even know about that have decided that they're not going to have Down syndrome kids. And those kids are killed before they have a chance to take their first breath, because their test came back saying that they had Down syndrome. That is a reality that they face. As an autistic person who is perfectly happy with her life, that's unacceptable. It should not be the case that somebody's screening can come back and say, oh, your kid's autistic, okay, I'm not going to have that kid. That's not okay. And so because of that, I am against prenatal screening, even though as an autistic parent, I want it so badly. I don't want to deal with this whole year and a half of people telling me it's in my head and it's too young to diagnose and all this other crap. Just right from the gate, you have an autistic child, let's celebrate it, let's go on the road. And I'm not saying so I can put him in ABA earlier.
Right.
I'm saying because he has needs and his developmental pathway, I don't even need to think about.
But you were able to, through your own life, you were able to sort of prepare, even though people disagree with you and said, no, you're just imagining things. You were able to still prepare. Do you think with prenatal testing that, I mean, granted, you would have parents making that choice.
Yeah.
But for those who choose, like you said, those parents who choose to have their children, regardless of the fact if they have Down syndrome or not, do you think that if they had that screening, that perhaps if they were able to prepare, that when they had their child, they wouldn't be so confused or lost, so to speak, as parents? Because we talked about earlier with awareness versus acceptance, so many parents were, I feel like I'm in the dark, or I don't feel like I know what I'm doing, and I'm frightened, and I don't understand my child. If they had a prenatal screening and they had time to actually learn this information and gather it from actual autistic people, do you think that would follow a similar path to how we treat Down syndrome, or would
I do
we
think that
treat
would,
differently?
I think it would totally change. I think that these would be parents who are making informed decisions, who have accepted that they're going to have an autistic child and have gone out and probably asked autistic adults, hey, if you had the choice to be born or not be born, what would you choose? What is my child's life going to be like? They would be searching for those answers to what their child's life will be like. And they would then, at the time where they said, okay, I'm going to have this child, from that point on, they would be about acceptance. They would be about, I believe that we would see a very similar month to what we see with the Down syndrome community. And it may be still called awareness. I don't know. I like acceptance better. I don't know. But it is interesting to me that you have these 2 months of awareness. That's their official titles. And they're so very different.
I actually hadn't considered that, because I was more familiar with March being International Women's Month than Down Syndrome Awareness Month. So that actually brings some very interesting points that I had not entirely considered, because I still kind of am I still see the prenatal screen to be kind of a negative.
Yeah.
But I think that with more information, a lot more parents would say, well, I knew this going into this, so I didn't have to worry about it. Instead, when they had their kid, they are watching their behaviors and are thinking, oh no, something's wrong, and they panic and they fear and they just are terrified that something is going to harm their child or that their child is being harmed. So with that, I think that might do some good. It's such...
To me, the price
complex
tag for the children that wouldn't be born is too high. And so I actively do discourage, and I don't look forward to that. But if the scientific knowledge becomes available, you commit I'm taking advantage of it. I'll be like, in my first prenatal, when can we get that test done? Because I want to know, is my child autistic? And also, we celebrate autism in our household. Every January 23rd, my son gets a cupcake. And it's because that's his diagnosis date. That's when he got affirmed as an autistic member of society. And my husband has raised questions about if we have a neurotypical child, then you have this extra date throughout the year that we celebrate my child's diagnosis, and you don't get a neurotypical diagnosis. So what do you do then? Well, if I had, advanced knowledge when I was 6 months old or before he was born that he's going to be autistic, maybe we wouldn't have that celebration. And we could just celebrate all kids equally. But I do think it's important to reaffirm that this is something to celebrate. I tell people every day, literally every day, on parent groups who are like, we just got the diagnosis and I feel so confused, I don't know what to do. I tell them, go celebrate. If you cannot celebrate autism itself, if you're not in that mental space where you're ready to accept it and think it's a great thing and everything, at the very least, you now have knowledge that will help you parent your child. And that is something to celebrate. Maybe not the effects of it, maybe not what that means for you down the road, but celebrate your child's diagnosis because it's information. Nothing changed from the day you got your diagnosis to the day before or the year before. Your child, you love your child. Your knowledge of your child has changed, and it's changed in a way that's going to help you better parent. So celebrate that. And I tell everybody that, and it seems to get really great reactions like, oh my gosh, I needed to hear that, or because a lot of people think that, I have this talking child, but they're diagnosed autistic, so they're going to stop talking now, or crazy things like that.
Well, if they ever actually do go through with prenatal testing and make it a thing, I hope that, like your child, they will grow up in a household that those children who are born, who are brought into the world by their parents, they're accepted for who they are, they're celebrated, and that instead of what's been happening for many years, brought on, of course, I talked a little bit about the disability of mourning, but at least in that regard, I'm not saying it's positive, I'm not saying I want it, but at least if they know and they're aware that the child will grow up in a household that will understand them.
Yeah.
So many of us, I've heard stories about, my parents didn't understand me, my parents have been trying to, get rid of this, they've been trying to turn me into something that I'm not. And if that were the case, I at least hope that would be the one thing I would really, really hope for and be optimistic about. But experience has taught me that's not always the case. I'm going to skip, actually. We're not going to talk about the George Will thing. No. Because I'm like, you know what? We talked about the Duke thing. That's fine. George Will said something about the same thing about the president. I'm just not going to get into that. That's just not, we've covered that a lot. I do want to talk a little bit, though, about another news story that popped up in my feed this past February. There was a 24-year-old man with autism went to a gun range to shoot with his family. And this is someone who can ride a motorcycle. He's rappelled from a skyscraper before. He works a part-time job. I mean, basically, he functions in society pretty much as well as anybody else. So, this is a typical activity that his family does. The problem is, on February 20th, on Tuesday, he was actually turned away from shooting because of the fact that he is autistic. And it was called a liability. Now, his name is Stephen Prescott. And Stephen is mostly nonverbal. He uses an iPad to speak to others. That's his communication device. But he was told that he was a liability because he couldn't give any kind of response or cues that he understood the safety briefing or something along that line to actually go on the range and shoot a firearm safely. Never mind the fact that he's done this before. And I think that he stated it. He actually understated it because Stephen even typed out. He said, "I was a little disappointed." Now, myself, I do own a firearm, and I do occasionally go and shoot at a range. I guess I'm very fortunate with the fact that they don't know I'm autistic, and I refuse to tell them. Is autism really a liability here? And considering the mass shootings that have taken place as of late, or as of the past, almost our entire lives, where mass shooters are consistently given the label by the media as autistic, what do you think?
I believe this is discrimination. It's not used to delegitimize something else, but it's still a sign of discrimination. This person, like you said, you go to a gun range yourself. I don't like shooting. I don't think me and guns would get along very well. But a gun range is a safe place to shoot. I haven't been, but I'm sure they have their rules, safety parameters, how to handle the gun in certain areas. There's probably areas where you can shoot and areas where you can't. And this is where you go to shoot guns safely. Of course, you can go to your own backyard. I think you mentioned earlier that this guy has family members that will let them come shoot elsewhere.
Yeah, his family and friends have opened up land and ranges for him to shoot. And the irony here, I don't know, actually I wouldn't consider the irony, but I would consider it sort of problematic, is they state that, well, he's a liability because he can't say he understands the safety briefings. But then this range turned back and had offered Stephen to come back during a less busy time for an in-depth safety briefing, followed by a one-on-one lesson. And I'm kind of confused because, I mean, how basic is the safety briefing? Is it a piece of paper he just signs it? Because, I mean, I understand that if you think he can't read, but if he's responding with an iPad and he can hit, yes, I understand, or, tell me what are the 7 phases of gun ownership, which is not a thing. I made that completely, but, something along that line that would correspond with this. It just, I was confused and stymied that they would offer this. Because if it really was a liability, then you would not have the person come back. Just as you don't allow, certain animals in certain places because they are a liability, this is the way you're being treated. Not saying that Steven's an animal. He's not. He's a human being. And I agree with you, it is discrimination. Yeah,
this thing screams of discrimination on so many levels. The whole in-depth liability or safety procedure covering... that, to me, is discriminatory. I mean, it's great that they are giving him the option to come back, but to do so in a way that is above and beyond what they would consider for anybody else, I would argue to say that probably their in-depth things should probably be given to everybody. If this person can understand that, but can't understand the original one, supposedly. So, all kinds of discrimination here.
It doesn't seem like this is the first time he's done this. It doesn't,
right.
In the article they talk about, loud noises and kickback can serve as triggers. Well, yeah, but you're wearing hearing protection.
Right.
I've gone trap shooting up near a lake near here, and I use both earplugs and over the ear, the giant, huge foam things that cover your ears. And, that doesn't really, it's not loud. Now, if this person is riding a motorcycle, which doesn't have the same decibel level, but it is very loud though, and it does have a lot of sensory input. I mean, if you're doing that, you're probably going to be okay handling a weapon. Plus, he's with his family, so whatever's going on, they will make sure he has learned to handle a firearm correctly and knows how to do so.
And you said he's done it before.
Yeah.
So
it says here he's done it before.
Nothing with the kickback or whatever should be a surprise to him if he's done it before. Yeah, this whole thing just screams of discrimination.
Yeah, the fun part is the actual owner of the range. His son is also autistic, and I'm thinking, okay, so you look at this person and you're instantly comparing them to your child who is younger and is not shooting because they're too young to do so. That doesn't, as you said, this is infantilizing. This is keeping somebody in that you're going to be permanently at this emotional state.
And autism is a type of developmental delay. Of course, it is not the only developmental delay. But delay means that eventually you do progress.
Yeah.
Maybe a different developmental pathway or a different time. But the infantilization is a massive problem. In articles like this, possibly, I don't know enough of their intentions or whatever to say that it is infantilization. It sounds like it when you say that he has a younger child and you're comparing an older person to a younger child. You get that a lot in the autism community when talking to autistics. You're not like my child. Well, yeah, I'm 29, 37, 45. Your child's how old again? A lot of things happen in 30 years or 20 years or 10 years.
Do you think mass shootings, with many shooters being labeled autistic or saying, oh, they had a diagnosis of autism, whenever all that's purported and not entirely accurate, do you think the sort of, and forgive me on the pun, but the sort of shotgun reaction to labeling all mass shooters with the diagnosis of autism, do you think that played into this role here?
It could have. I definitely could see how a gun range would consider it a liability if all these people that shoot people. I think it's really interesting that you even have this happening, because the only times that autistic people are really, if you want to use the word violent, and I think violence implies some sort of intent to it, but the only times when we might act or trigger somebody's alarm as being violent is during a meltdown. And if you're in a meltdown, you're not carrying a gun, you're not shooting, you're definitely not aiming. That's a cold-blooded, sober moment when these shooters are in. Even in a shutdown, you're not going to be able to do that. You can't plan shutdowns either. You don't plan meltdowns. It's like an emotional volcano. That's when you see the so-called violent behavior. And I think that's where you get the idea that, oh, he's autistic because violence and he's okay with it. But it's not that we're okay with being violent in a meltdown. It's just a whole lot of misunderstanding of what it means to be autistic, to even think that a shooter could do that because of autism. I'm not going to say there has never been an autistic shooter. Totally could have. He would not have been in a meltdown at the time. He would have been stone cold sober, emotionally. He would have probably had antisocial personality disorder as well, or other compounding factors. That's possible. It's possible that an autistic could do that. But in general, it's not going to happen that this act of violence is because of the autism.
I guess that would roll back into the whole lack of empathy thing, that it is because autism is looked at and seems to be compared to certain sociopathic traits, that's where this is coming from. But they keep repeating it over and over again, especially when the shooter is a young white male. It is always brought up because,
at the moment, it's a great scapegoat.
It is, because it's they're not very social, they don't have a lot of friends, and so they try to look for something and they hit upon autism and they just slap it on there. And I find it to be extremely dangerous, and in this case also, this is, and I'm going to use this just because I haven't had a chance to use this much, it is infringing upon this gentleman's Second Amendment rights as an autistic. So, I don't really use that much at all. I don't really bring that up. But in this case, I'm like, this is an instance where this would be something that maybe could be looked at. But as you're correct, I fully agree. It's discrimination. And I'm glad that he at least is able to go somewhere else to do this and is not judged so harshly by that. So, but yeah, this is something that appeared along with recent mass shootings. I'm like, this is just too coincidental to not be really closely related, in my opinion. But
I would say it's probably closely related.
But going into something probably darker, we've talked about awareness and some fears of parents and others, as well as certain labels that are used to describe autistic traits and how they're applied negatively. Back in February, around the same time, there was a uptick, it seemed like, in the use of bleach, or miracle mineral solution as it's fraudulently named. There was a mom who actually was accused. I believe she was not arrested. Her child was removed from her home because she was trying to feed her child bleach, or what's commonly called chloride dioxide.
To be clear, the way that these things work, they don't actually feed children. I'm not advocating for this. I want people to understand what's going on. They feed them something that when it hits the liver and the intestines, turns to bleach. So it's self-bleach. They're not getting the bleach off the... Usually, they shouldn't be getting the bleach off of the shelf and giving it to the children. It is something that, though chemically, once it reacts with the chemicals in your body, is the same as bleach.
It says here that the mother mixed hydrochloric acid and a water purifying solution, which includes chlorine. So, is that what you're talking about? How they were separate, they combined them together, they drank it, and then as it processes through the body,
it becomes bleach.
It just basically ravages everything and destroys
right.
all the organs
I
it
am
touches.
not anywhere close to advocating. This is a completely, absolutely dangerous thing that parents are doing in the name of a cure for autism. There are groups online that people go and show intestine shedding and say that that's the parasite that is autism. It is absolutely gross and disgusting and horrible. But to say that the parents are feeding their people bleach is a little bit of an oversimplification. So just to be clear on that.
But they are dangerous chemicals.
They are dangerous chemicals. And that definitely, by the time they get to your liver and your intestines, like I said, they've had DNA tests done on these samples of parasites, and they are absolutely the kids' intestines that has been...
coming out of them.
Yeah.
I mean, because hydrochloric acid all on its own is actually pretty harsh chemical and water purifying solution. You don't really want to drink that.
Right.
So even separately, I kind of see them as really detrimental chemicals. But circling back again, when we talked about parent advocacy groups, what's going on here? Because I thought MMS was gone. I thought 4 years ago, the guy who supposedly created it, the snake oil salesman, the scam artist, he left the U.S. to avoid being arrested for this because he's essentially selling a product that can kill people and calling it what it's not. I thought this was done. Why is this coming back?
Unfortunately, it's not done. It went underground. I am in several parent groups, and one of them has been really bad to autistics before, but has, as of late, been a fairly friendly ground to be in. Not always, but more so than usual. To the point that some autism parents will come to a comment and say, hey, I have a solution for you, but you'll have to join this group. And that post is then taken down within enough time that I guess the person likes it to say that, yeah, I read it. And then it's taken down so that nobody knows that that's being spread. And these are secret and groups where MMS is very common and talked about. And like I said, shared success stories and, again, air quotes people, through the parent's point of view of what's going on. So it never went away. There's a prominent autistic advocate named Emma Dalemalin. Forgive me, I don't know how to pronounce her last name. She's in the UK. She's very outspoken against MMS. She will report parents to CPS and other governmental such agencies when she hears of them doing it online. And she's been banned for groups for doing so. That's kind of her, if you want to say, her cause that she's really passionate about. And I believe she's even gotten into trouble, like, legally for such things before. But yeah, it's still alive. I don't want to say in well.
I mean, so these chemicals, I mean, are they just handing out instructions to other parents, or are we actually seeing, because according to this article, you can buy these online. I mean, are they showing parents where to buy this, or are they actually selling it under the MMS name?
I'm sure that the groups that actually advocate it and are fighting for it and all those other horrible things probably sell it either through this person is how you get it, or I don't know, they might even have a multi-level scheme where they're actually actively becoming people to promote the item through a system, much with what you see with other multi-level marketing agendas.
So, I mean, this is...
But I don't know that. I'm just saying
It makes sense. I mean, because it's, like you said, it's underground, so it's not going to be easily seen by just anybody passing through. Have you ever been approached by someone trying to push, like, hey, if you know, I noticed you're talking about your kid and that they're autistic, you know, would you like to know about this new treatment or something?
Nobody has tried to sell me MMS. I did have somebody try to sell me the pink drink from... I can't remember it all of a sudden, but anyways, they claimed that it could cure autism, and I kind of laughed at them and said, I don't want to cure, and no, it doesn't. And they also had it listed, it's supposed to be like a diet drink, and also supposedly help with like, I don't know, they basically listed everything under the sun, ADHD, autism. I said, like, if you give me a list of everything and claim it cures everything, then I'm going to assume that it cures nothing on that list.
Yeah, it seems way too much.
That's my rule.
It seems way too much like the history of snake oil that they would sell in communities around the United States during the
and that's happened twice.
Twice, wow.
From the same company.
Yeah, I really haven't received anything along that line at all. The closest I came to that was a parent seeking information about chelation, and they put it in such a way that they didn't say the word, but basically what they described, it was chelation.
Yeah, the high metal levels and... Oh,
yeah. I said, I remember I said, you aren't thinking about chelation, are you? That could kill your child. Because it can. It is definitely, it's something that you only use if you have serious heavy metal poisoning. And we're talking about like very, very heavy exposure in some way, shape, or form, but not from, not living every day. You know, you have sufficient iron in your blood, you have sufficient other metals in your blood, but you're not having heavy metal poisoning.
Now, not to me personally, but I have had parents ask me about chelation and what I think of it. And I just tell them, well, if you go to your typical doctor, ask for a blood test. If they don't tell you that you have lead poisoning or whatever, then no, you don't do chelation. If you have lead poisoning or whatever, then obviously you need to do what you need to do to address that. According to what your doctor recommends. But you shouldn't be doing these things. Gluten casein-free diet is another one that people just assume, oh, you're autistic, you need to be on gluten casein-free. I've been told that I should try that diet. No, that's a celiac thing, which can be a comorbid, but it's not something that an autistic person will automatically benefit from. And there are celiac patients that have like low bone density and stuff because of the lack of diversity in their diet and stuff, and like that's a medical necessity for them. So that's something that they need to do because of other things. For you to put your child on this diet just because they're autistic without having the celiac test is not okay.
I shudder to think what the next trend will be, because this really, I mean, when I heard about this and how they were doing this, that it was not only orally, but also they were giving their children enemas.
Yeah.
It just, I remember I heard about it, I thought this is going to go away because enough parents are going to hear, well, these are bleach, these are chemicals that are bleach, and they're going to go, wow, I don't want to do that. Bleach is horrible. But as you said, it's still alive. It still thrives underground.
It's still alive. It's still thriving underground. You still have parents who are devastated and just looking for anything to save them from this horror. So many air quotes going on over here, people. Seriously, this horror that is autism. The autisms are coming after your children, and what can you do? And MMS is one. There's a 2 or 3 people that I know in the autism groups that I'm in are really big on hyperbaric oxygen chambers. Again, that is a medical necessity thing that you do for certain things, not autism. So just think about it. If what you're doing is supposed to be for a different medical thing, I get on this with ABA a lot. ABA uses error-free learning. And that is a technique developed for brain trauma people. And I'm not saying that we're better than brain trauma people. I'm saying we're different than brain trauma people. And so you shouldn't be using brain trauma techniques on an autistic person. You shouldn't be using somebody who is having trouble getting oxygen through their blood on an autistic person unless their skin's turning blue or whatever. You shouldn't be using heavy metal toxin eliminations on an autistic person unless they happen to also have heavy metal toxins. So think about whatever medical procedure you're doing. Yes, it may be totally legitimate under certain circumstances. If your child doesn't hit those certain circumstances, it is not a legitimate use of medicine.
Yeah, and you shouldn't feed your kids bleach.
And you shouldn't feed, yes.
But moving with this in sort of the same vein, recently there was an outbreak in our territory of measles, and I believe, I'm not sure,
Has it passed 16 yet?
I am not aware, to be quite honest. I know that
I heard 16.
I did hear that a couple people may have died or are in severe condition because of just how virulent the measles was for them, but I'm not sure about that. However, it did relate back to a recent article read from this week that many children with autism, as well as their siblings, are just not being vaccinated. That the rate is actually quite low between 95 and 2010, and from 97 to 2014, we're seeing a decline. Specifically, I'm quoting from the article here, only 82% of children with autism spectrum disorder over the age of 7 got the recommended shots from the ages 4 to 6, compared to 96% of the control group. And 84% got the MMR vaccine, compared to 96% of children without autism. And this really startled me the most. Only 76% of younger siblings to children with autism got the recommended first-year shots. Meanwhile, compared to 84% of younger siblings to children without autism. So we're seeing a definite decrease in vaccinations, not just of autistic children, but also their siblings. And you brought up a little bit about vaccines before, that maybe a good way to look at this would be to have brain scans, and that you could wait a year, not vaccinate the child, and then scan their brain to see, if their brain is autistic. And this kind of it kind of hit me with that, with these statistics, that we're seeing a huge decrease in vaccination. Now, I know between 96 to 82 is not that big, but for herd immunity, it is.
The problem is when autism is brought up, the buck stops. This discussion stops. It just becomes, oh no, the autisms. And autism this, and I would love to see a final divorce from vaccines and autism, because I think there's a lot of conversation that needs to happen with vaccines and society in general over the autoimmune, over when to apply, when not to, and you don't get that type of discussion as soon as autism enters this conversation.
Do you think vaccines worsen autism symptoms, as they usually you hear about that vaccines are causing my child to be more autistic?
You can't be more autistic. The autistic brain is autistic. But as far as appearing autistic, I could see there being a correlation, because needles aren't fun. And autism symptoms and traits, what people consider autistic traits, stimming, meltdowns, are very much connected to stress. And so if you're taking a child who doesn't understand why the needle's coming near their skin, and they're hurting, and sometimes you have inflammation and pain that they're not able to communicate, that could be a very stressful thing that could produce stressful things. I don't think that's saying that it was the vaccine that did it. It's the community and the whole everything that goes around the vaccine, that
the experience of the vaccine.
Right, and I think that could create a increase in severity, air quotes again, of how autistic a person looks. And also there's the fact that you see this around age 2. There was a study last year, got really excited about it in February, that was released on the BBC that showed unequivocally that brains are autistic before they ever have any traits. This is people looking over at eyesight, at turning to their name, all these things, and these kids who experience regressions that people thought, is the type of autism that is caused, not born. They talk about there being 2 different types. And they have proof from 6 months, because that's the youngest that you can do an MRI because you have to put them under, from 6 months on, that the brain is already autistic at 6 months, and then they continue this developmental pathway up to age 3 or 2, and something around age 3 or 2, it could be starting preschool, it could be getting a new brother or sister, who knows why, something probably starts reacting more to stress and causes these kids to quote-unquote become autistic around the same time that vaccines are being given, around the same time that you would have that experience of stress from vaccines and the vaccination process. But this study actually showed that the brain was autistic, there was no traits, there was nothing, and then the child got the diagnosis around age 2 or so. But the brain was already there.
So there's correlation, but there's not a connection between the two,
right,
in that regard. And so further vaccines, you know, if your child is autistic, at this point, it's kind of irrelevant, even if someone was to say, well, you know, vaccines caused it. It's like, well, that doesn't matter because the child is still living and they're autistic and they're going to be for the rest of their lives.
It's the stress. And
because they were born that way.
Right.
Yeah.
If you're seeing anything, it's the stress. And, you know, maybe that can lead to less painful vaccinations if we can figure out how to get it into the skin, into the body, without a needle involved. I think there's supposed to be something that came out last year, or something with like a puff of air.
They had something that sort of like Velcro that you would attach as well. That was very small needles, but they didn't feel painful. It actually felt like the rough side of Velcro.
That's what I've heard, something like that. So something like that would take down the stress of an autistic child. Maybe not if they have a doctor phobia. I mean, there's a ton of things to go through here. Very stressful things.
But if you give it a different environment and you just had it as a patch or something, that would be much less traumatic.
Yeah.
Because I don't like going... I mean, I'm not a big fan of hospitals or doctors either.
Yeah.
I mean, at this point, I can roll with it. I can adapt to it. I remember I was told how, it's not the shot's not going to hurt. It's like, I can still feel the shot, and it does not feel wonderful.
Right.
So, the reaction would be there. Yeah, I can see how that would cause problems and the reactions that would be directly tied to the experience, but then they would tie it to vaccines because of the lack of information.
Right.
You talked a little bit about kind of there are two camps, those who believe autism is caused and those who believe that autism is born. When we talk about that, is there kind of a division? I mean, we know about the division between parents and autistics, so to speak, between those advocacy groups. What about among autistics themselves? Is there kind of a split in neurodiverse philosophy, or are we more or less united?
This is an interesting topic because the overwhelming idea is that these awareness campaigns and the way that we're raised around autism can shade how we view it as adults. You have the autistic community. The autistic community is very well united. If you go from one group of people in the autistic community to another group, you'll encounter very much the same philosophies, the very same overall environment, awareness of accessibility, and just, I think it's a great place to be no matter which section you're in. But to say that all autistics think the same on all topics, there are autistics that prefer a person with autism. Would I call that really a split within the community? No, I don't think so. I think I call it individual preference, And I think you have to think similarly within the autistic community. Of course, we're like advocating for rights and stuff, and so things like somebody preferring person with autism, that can be a bit of the friction starter, but I respect people who want to be called people with autism. I will actually say, even though it sounds so redundant, that autistics and people with autism say something, or I will just say on the spectrum because that seems to be very neutral, to give legitimacy to that, because as a person who has autism, you have the right to prefer that. That's what I like to say. That's not to say that a parent can decide that you have autism. That's not to say that the parent has the right to decide your terminology. You, as the individual, have that right, and I will respect that. I will screw the parents if they tell me that their kid has autism. No, your child is autistic unless they have thrown any type of communication out there that says that they're not autistic, they have autism, then you better use or the preference of the majority. That is a very difficult territory, and I've talked about it with my advocate friends. I was like, how do we deal with that? There are a small group, very small group, that is much more common, that autistics have had experience with ABA and are traumatized by it, and but there is a small group of people that appreciate it. I would love to see a study that asks autistic individuals their personal opinion on certain matters and then ask about their history to see if, their parents saying something when they were younger is why they agree against the majority. But even then, even when we disagree, like I said, we're all autistic.
So speaking of terminology, I wanted to kind of end on this because you talked about it last time and I wasn't able to focus on it a whole lot. We've seen recently the high functioning, low functioning. Instead of focusing on autistic, it's been kind of separated. Mostly it seems based upon verbal communication. Those who can verbalize what they're saying are deemed high functioning, and those who cannot are deemed low functioning. Now, we talked about this. I thought you made a very good point that kind of terminology, high and low, really belittles those who are labeled with the low terminology. So in that regard, could you bring back what you talked about instead of using high or low functioning, what terminology we should use that is more respectful, and just how that difference in terminology has kind of put a rift between those of us who are autistic and those who are parents?
Parents will insist, high and low, that you're nothing like my child. And it's important, it is very important that I be able to say high functioning or low functioning so you know what I'm dealing with. But short of speech, which we know that IQ tests are incredibly biased towards verbal people, so you're not likely to be nonverbal and pass an IQ test. Could happen, but not likely. Then you are looking at a overall generalization that, if you're high functioning, you're going to be able to speak because you're able to pass that IQ test.
So you brought up last time, what should we be using instead?
So if you're going to have to put something out there, then talk about support needs necessary, which can be anywhere from, I need an extra 5-minute break at school to I need somebody with me 24/7 to make sure that I'm doing stuff or to do things for me that I can't do. That would be obviously high needs support and low needs support and moderate needs support, somewhere in between. But I really do think that you can have a conversation about autistics and talk in a way that doesn't use functioning levels at all. Just says, I have an autistic child. She has issues with potty training at age 5. We've been trying. She's not interested. You don't need to put low functioning in there. You can talk about your autistic child who's about to go off to college and is worried about the dorm situation and doesn't want a roommate. You don't have to say they're high functioning. There's just, in my opinion, no need for it.
One of the things that I also noticed is in celebration of this upcoming month is that you posted this graphic, the 30 days of acceptance and appreciation, with each day something that you could post about in social media or just even write down on your own, which I really enjoyed this. I liked seeing this. I thought this was very interesting. It also is very positive. As you described, the Down Syndrome Awareness Month is very positive. This seems very positive. What I would like done, just to kind of end the show, is I'd like you to pick one of these, say what it is, and then kind of describe it. So just kind of any one of these at all, and then that way just kind of end on that.
Okay, so day 25 is about symbols, and I originally called it symbology because I like big words, but I figured people wouldn't know what that was. So one of the more differences between the autistic and autism community is the puzzle piece or the neurodiversity symbol. And if you look at my graphic, I used the neurodiversity symbol in the lower left-hand corner.
It's the infinity symbol
with the rainbow,
with a color rainbow going across
right.
all of it. Okay.
And if you get my Autistic Pride Bear plug, it also has the neurodiversity symbol on it and a crossed out puzzle piece. Autistics generally do not like the puzzle piece. There are some that have tried to want to reclaim it. There are some that just prefer it because they grew up around it, or they like puzzles, or any number of reasons. But in general, we consider it to be something that has a bad history. And one thing that I have kind of gotten in trouble for saying lately, but I do believe it, parents will say that the puzzle piece doesn't mean that it's till all the pieces fit for them, or that a piece is missing. It means that their child is the one piece they need in their life, or something to that effect, trying to make it as if they can change the terminology of the symbol. And to that, I say this, and I will say that, like I said, not everybody loves me saying this, but, you know, the swastika has a really bad past. I mean, the whole World War II thing, terrible, and I understand that, but it reminds me of a golden sun. In fact, that's historically accurate. It was a golden sun and a good luck symbol. So since that's what it means to me, that should be what matters, right? Nobody on the street's gonna care that I'm using a sign that is very discriminatory and has been used to harm people, because they know that if I'm wearing it, it means something meaningful to me. I don't see any difference in that statement than to say that the puzzle piece is significant to you in a way that's atypical from how it is usually perceived.
It serves a very purely personal preference.
Right. When you put that symbol out there, it is received, and it's very highly linked. People like to say, well, if it's not blue, it's not Autism Speaks. Well, that's not really true. I've looked at the, because of my Autistic Pride Bear, I looked at the Autism Speaks copyright, and it says no mention of color. They do usually use blue, but they actually have right to that specific shape. And changing the shape does a good job of avoiding copyright. But people look at it and instantly think, that's for Autism Speaks, that's for autism awareness.
So aside from, of course, buying your bear, what else, what would be a better way to celebrate? I mean, for neurotypicals, how would they be helpful in assisting? Like, what symbols could they, aside from the infinity symbol, what other things could they do symbolically that would be more beneficial and more helpful to autistics?
This probably will air after April 2nd, which is a shame, because April 2nd is Autism Awareness Day, or as I like to say, Autistic Acceptance Day, or even Autistic Appreciation Day. Wow, that's pushing it, isn't it? But the autistics actually prefer red or gold. Actually, I've seen this year a lot more people preferring gold to red, which is really cool. I love the symbology behind gold. For those that do not know, it is pushed by the Autistic Union. Their initials, of course, are AU. The first two letters are of autistic and autism spectrum disorder are AU. And how a chemical symbol in science gets its name
The
usually
periodic
is
table.
the periodic table is usually from the first two letters. Not always. Lead is like LB or something, but usually from the first two letters of the word. And in the cases where it's not, it's actually the first two letters of the word in a different language. So using that, the periodic table, the element for AU is gold. And so they like to glow it up gold, light it up gold. And I've seen a lot of autistics get behind that this year. And years past, it's been more split, where you have some people doing red instead, and you have some people doing lighted up gold. I was a person that made profile pictures for people with a lens that was either gold or red, so I know the division that was. And this year I've seen a lot more people lighting up gold and pushing gold beliefs. I asked a parents group that had an autism community or autistic presence, what were they lighting it up as, and so many were lighting up gold. So gold preferred, red is perfectly fine too. At this point, the autistic community has not banded around one color and been like, this is ours. But those are the two that are major things. I don't like red instead, personally, because it's supposed to be the opposite of blue. And if anybody knows the color wheel, the opposite of blue is not red, it's orange. And that is why my bear is orange. And there's a red instead option as well. And a gold option. But yeah, so it bothers me that they claim to be the opposite of, and they're not. Of course, if you go with the light spectrum, red is the opposite of blue. So there is an argument to be made there. Just something that rubs me the wrong way when you talk about a very literal group of people. One of my favorite symbols that I've seen, when everybody always asks for these, I'm getting an autism tattoo, what should I use? And it's always this puzzle pieces in a million different configurations. Somebody posted, and they had a tattoo of a Batman sign with the spectrum colors inside of it. And that's because their kid had a special interest in Batman, and then the spectrum colors for the spectrum. The spectrum rainbow colors.
Did you ever get a tattoo?
Actually, I do have a plan for an autistic tattoo sometime in the future. It's kind of massive, but the idea, because I'm a crochet artist, and that is very important to me, and my two special interests that take over my life are autistic advocacy and crochet, I want to have, once I'm done having kids, a yarn ball for each of my children, plus my husband, depending on how many kids I end up having. My husband may or may not get tossed out of that line. But each one has a different color, and they're yarn balls arranged in something like a circle or something. And each one has an end going into the middle where it's all just a tangled mess of yarn attached to a single crochet hook that has a piece of fiber being off of it that uses the colors. And then above this is the words one awesome, and that awesome is spelled specifically AUSOME, mess. And that is what I would like to get someday, whenever I know who my family is and I get over my fear of needles again.
That would be a very significant obstacle to doing that. But I mean, you could always even make it on a t-shirt before you do that and try it out.
True, yeah.
Well, I wanted to thank you for being here. It is always a pleasure. I love reading what you write. I may not agree with you on everything, but you have a very strong opinion about certain things, and you back that up with other information, and you also bring other issues to light that I don't always consider, and that's why I want to bring you back, and I think that's very important. So to wrap things up, I just wanted to say Happy Autism Acceptance Month to you, Shayna. I'm Leo Jones, and this has been Neurologic. Neurologic is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License. To view a copy of this license, visit creativecommons.org/licenses/by-nc-nd/4.0 or send the letter to Creative Commons, P.O. Box 1866, Mountain View, California 94042, USA. Neurologic uses the song Furious Freak, created by Kevin MacLeod, for its intro and outro music. Visit him at inconpatech.com. Furious Freak is licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 3.0 license, creativecommons.org/licenses/by/3.0. You can reach Leo Jones and Neurologic by email at neurologicpodcast@gmail.com.